He said it so easily, like cutting a thread that had been dangling too long. I can't do this anymore, Mira. My parents won't accept someone from your background. I remember the pause, that awful, stretched silence between us. I was standing in the corner of the cafe, the same one where we'd once planned our future in whispers. The smell of roasted beans, the sound of rain outside. Everything felt like a cruel echo of what I thought love meant. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because my mind refused to register what my ears were hearing. You're joking, I said. After everything? He looked away. Shame? No, just discomfort. You know how my family is. It's not about you. It's just status image. That word image cut deeper than any insult. He didn't see me anymore. Just a daughter of a driver. The girl with hand-me-down clothes and second-hand dreams. When he left, I sat there for an hour, staring at the empty chair across from me. The same chair where he'd once held my hands and promised me forever. Now, all I could see was the stain of spilled coffee on the table between us, small, insignificant. Just like I suddenly felt, outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened, but I didn't move. I think that was the moment I realized heartbreak wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, polite, even like someone closing a door softly on their way out of your life. That night, as I walked home through puddles, I made myself a promise. One day, he'd remember this moment, not because I begged him to stay, but because I didn't. The days after he left blurred into something colorless. I still went to work at the little marketing agency downtown, still smiled when people spoke to me, but it wasn't me living those moments. It was a shell, moving through life on autopilot. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart betrayed me. I wanted it to be him. It never was. His rejection didn't just break my heart, it fractured my sense of worth. Suddenly, every insecurity I had about where I came from grew louder. The old house with chipped paint. My father's tired hands after double shifts. My mother is patching old clothes instead of buying new ones. Everything I had once seen as love and resilience, he had reduced to shame. For a while, I believed him. I started working later, volunteering for projects no one wanted. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I became valuable enough, maybe I could erase a version of me that wasn't good enough for him. But it wasn't until one night when I caught my reflection in the glass window of my office that I realized I didn't want him back. I wanted me back. That realization didn't come gently. It came after months of exhaustion and silence. One night, my father came into my room, his eyes soft but proud. You're working too hard, Mira, he said. You'll burn out. I told him. I have to prove something. He didn't ask what. Maybe he already knew. A week later, my boss announced he was retiring and the company would be merging with a bigger firm, a real corporate giant. Everyone was worried about layoffs. Everyone except me. I was too numb to fear losing anything else. But when the merger happened, something shifted. The new CEO, a sharp woman named Layla, noticed me. She liked my ideas, my persistence, the way I turned small campaigns into something human. She took me under her wing, mentored me, and pushed me beyond what I thought I could handle. And just like that, the climb began. 2 years later, I was heading my own department. 5 years after that, I had started my own firm built from scratch, with sleepless nights and borrowed courage. I didn't have luxury back then, but I had grit. I didn't have investors who believed in me, but I had a vision that refused to die. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I stopped thinking about him. Or at least, I thought I did. Until I saw his name again. It was on a proposal that landed on my desk. A struggling company seeking a partnership, their last hope before bankruptcy. I skimmed the papers absent-mindedly until my eyes froze on the name at the bottom of the email. Ethan Gray, the same man who once told me I wasn't enough for his world, now needed my company to save his. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the universe had wrapped irony in gold paper and handed it to me personally. I read the email again, slower this time. The tone was desperate, professional, but pleading. They needed investors, clients, and support. They needed me. I sat there, staring at my monitor, feeling two versions of myself collide. The girl who once begged for love, and the woman who no longer needed approval. I didn't reply right away. I let the silence stretch for a week. Then two. And when my assistant came in one morning, holding another email marked urgent, I finally said, "Set up a meeting." The day I walked into that boardroom, I wasn't the same girl he had left behind in that caf. My hair was pulled back, my suit pressed, my stride steady. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of the dignity he once took from me. When I entered, he stood up, a reflex, probably, and for a brief second, the mask slipped. His eyes widened. Recognition hit him like a wave. "Mira?" I smiled, polite, distant. "Mr. Gray, it's been a while." He tried to compose himself, but I could see the cracks, the exhaustion, the stress. His company had been bleeding money for months. They needed contracts, clients, credibility, all things I could give with a single signature. He explained the proposal, his voice careful, his words practiced. But I didn't hear the numbers. I heard the ghost of his old words, "It's not about you. It's just status." Funny how status changes shape when survival enters the picture. When he finished speaking, I leaned back in my chair. "I'll review your proposal," I said. "But I have conditions." He nodded quickly. "Of course. Anything you need. Anything I need." The same man who once told me I wasn't enough now couldn't afford to lose me. After the meeting, I sat in my car for a long time. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, calm, composed, successful. But underneath, I felt something heavier. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Something quieter. Sadness, maybe. For the girl who had once loved him. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories flooded back, his laughter, his promises, the way he used to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. I hated that I could still remember such small things. I hated that part of me still cared, even after everything. But the next morning, when I signed the contract sealing his company's dependence on mine, I didn't feel anger. I felt closure. Life has a strange way of circling back. Sometimes what breaks you becomes the foundation for your strength. When I saw him again weeks later, he looked lighter. Maybe because the partnership had saved his company. Maybe because he had convinced himself I'd forgotten everything. But as we shook hands, I looked him in the eye and said, "I hope you learned something, Ethan. Not about business, about value." He hesitated. "Mira," I cut him off gently. "No explanations. Just gratitude. You taught me exactly who I never want to be." I walked away before he could answer. And this time, it wasn't rain that followed me, it was sunlight. Because I had finally stopped chasing his approval. I had become the person I was always meant to be, without his name, without his pity, without his love. And the best part, he knew it. The following months blurred into an unexpected rhythm: meetings, negotiations, polite exchanges with the man who once shattered me. Ethan and I had to meet often now, bound by contracts and quarterly reviews. Our companies were linked. His survival was balanced carefully in my hands. He was careful around me, always polite, always professional. But beneath the surface of his charm, I could see the unease, that subtle awareness that our positions had reversed. And while he smiled and spoke of business growth, I could sense his discomfort in every glance that lingered too long, every hesitation before using my name. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was realization. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply shifts quietly, invisibly, until one day, the person you once knelt before is the one deciding whether you stand or fall. I watched him stumble through board meetings, struggling to hold the confidence he once wore like armor. He'd been born into wealth, cushioned by family legacy, but years of mismanagement and arrogance had stripped him of that safety. Now, he needed what I had built from nothing: credibility, clients, and most of all, respect. And there was irony in that. The kind of irony that doesn't make you laugh, it just hums quietly in your chest while the world rearranges itself. One afternoon, we sat in a meeting with investors. He was presenting figures, trying to sound in control. His voice trembled slightly when he mentioned the collaboration with my firm, the one that had kept his company afloat. I saw one of the investors nod in approval. That partnership with Mira's firm really turned things around. The man said, "Mira's firm? The sound of it made something ache and heal inside me at once. Ethan smiled weakly. Yes, he said. She's been instrumental. After the meeting, as the investors left the room, he turned to me. You're enjoying this, aren't you? His voice was calm, but the bitterness beneath it was unmistakable. I looked at him, the same eyes that once avoided mine when he broke me. No, I said softly. Enjoying it would mean I still care enough to feel pleasure in your pain. He blinked, thrown off by the honesty. Then what do you feel? I thought for a moment. Pity, and maybe closure. He looked down, pretending to check his watch, but I could see the shame flicker in his eyes. That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred through my windshield. I should have felt victorious, but victory is rarely as clean as you imagine. It's messy. It carries ghosts. You can build empires on old pain, but sometimes even success feels heavy when you remember what built it. When I got home, my father was sitting in the living room, reading an old newspaper. His hair had gone grayer, his hands still calloused from years of labor. I kissed his forehead and sat beside him. He looked at me with quiet pride. You've done well, Mira. Your mother would have been proud. I smiled, but it faltered halfway. I should feel happy, shouldn't I? He folded the paper, his eyes steady. Happiness doesn't always follow justice. Sometimes peace does. That night I understood. What I wanted wasn't revenge or validation. I wanted peace, the kind that doesn't come from proving anyone wrong, but from no longer needing to. Weeks passed. Ethan and I met less frequently as our teams handled most operations. But one evening, I received an invitation to a corporate charity gala. His company was hosting it, a last attempt to rebuild public trust and attract new investors. I hadn't planned to go, but something inside me, maybe curiosity or maybe closure in disguise, made me attend. The hall was drenched in gold light. People moved like slow rivers of silk and laughter. When I entered, eyes turned, whispers followed. The self-made woman, the success story. It was strange being admired for the same strength I once thought was weakness. Ethan saw me across the room. For a moment, he froze. Then he smiled, that same careful, practiced smile he used to win people over. Mira, he said, approaching. I'm glad you came. Would have been rude to decline. I replied, my tone even. He chuckled awkwardly. You look incredible. I am, I said simply. We stood there, surrounded by chatter and champagne. But underneath the polite small talk, there was something raw, silent acknowledgement of everything unspoken between us. I was stupid, he finally said, his voice low. I thought money meant value. I thought love was about what others approved of. I was wrong. I didn't respond right away. I just watched him, the man who once seemed untouchable now speaking like someone who had finally seen the cracks in his own reflection. I'm not angry anymore, I said at last. But I won't forget either. You broke something that didn't belong to you, and I had to rebuild it alone. He swallowed, eyes glistening. I know, and I'm sorry. It was genuine. I could feel it. But some apologies come too late, not because they lack sincerity, but because time has already healed the wound without them. I nodded. I accept that. But forgiveness isn't a door I need to open for you. It's one I opened for myself. And with that, I turned away. Not dramatically. Not with tears. Just a quiet, steady step toward the exit. Outside, the air was cool. The city hummed beneath the night sky. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Because forgiveness didn't mean letting him back in, it meant freeing myself from the weight of his memory. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A new contract offer. Another opportunity. Another step forward. I smiled. Once, I thought love was something you had to prove yourself worthy of. Now I know love isn't currency, and worth isn't decided by who accepts or rejects you. He measured me by status. But I built a world where I set the value, and maybe that's the sweetest kind of revenge, not watching someone fall, but rising so high their judgment no longer reaches you. That night, as I drove through the quiet city, I whispered to myself, not in anger, but in peace, I hope he finds what I found. Not successful, not redemption, just the courage to start again. And in the reflection of the windshield, I saw her, the girl who once cried in a cafe, now smiling back at me, finally free. Time doesn't heal you. It just teaches you how to carry what once broke you without bleeding anymore. Months passed after the gala. Ethan faded from my orbit, like a storm that had raged long enough to exhaust itself. His company stabilized under the contracts we signed, but he no longer attended meetings. His emails were brief, professional, almost cautious, as if he'd finally learned the value of silence. And I moved forward. My firm grew faster than I ever expected. We opened branches in 2 more cities. My name began to mean something in boardrooms that once wouldn't have let me in the door. But success no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like peace. Some nights, I'd work late in my glass-walled office, watching the city lights shimmer against the skyline. I'd think of the years I'd spent chasing approval from him, from a world that decided who was worthy based on last names and family wealth. And I'd smile at how absurd it all seemed now, because I had everything I once thought I needed to earn respect. Power, stability, and none of it mattered as much as the quiet inside me did. One evening, as I was closing my laptop, my father called. His voice carried that mix of tiredness and pride that always made me soften. "They're honoring you next week," he said. "The Chamber of Commerce called. Lifetime Achievement Award." I laughed softly. "Lifetime? I'm barely halfway there," he chuckled. "You've lived enough for 3 lifetimes, Mira." That night, after I hung up, I found myself staring at an old photo album, the kind with fading edges and plastic sleeves. There was a picture of me and Ethan from years ago, sitting on a bench outside campus, heads tilted together, smiling like the world had already promised us forever. For a long time, I couldn't look away. I didn't feel hate, not even sorrow, just gratitude. Because that girl in the picture didn't know how strong she'd have to become. She didn't know how much it would cost her to find herself. And maybe that's what love was meant to do, sometimes not last forever, but wake you up. The night of the award ceremony, I wore a dark emerald gown, simple but commanding. When I entered the ballroom, the applause echoed like distant thunder. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, mentors, competitors, friends, people who had seen my journey, who knew I hadn't inherited this life. I'd built it with scraped hands and sleepless ambition. As I walked up to the stage, I noticed someone near the back of the room. A familiar face, half hidden behind the crowd. Ethan. He looked older, not just in years, but in the way regret etches itself into people. His shoulders slumped slightly, his eyes dimmer, but when he met my gaze, he smiled. A small, genuine smile. One that carried no expectation. I nodded back. Just once. And somehow that was enough. When I reached a microphone, the applause quieted. The lights softened. I took a breath. "I used to believe success was about proving people wrong," I began. "About turning pain into purpose, and silence into something loud enough to be heard. But over time, I learned that real success, real peace, isn't about being above anyone. It's about no longer needing to compare." I looked around the room, at the faces that once might have intimidated me. There was a time when I thought my worth came from what others thought of me, from love, validation, acceptance. But the truth is, your value isn't something anyone gives you. It's something you build, brick by brick. From the moments that tried to break you, somewhere in the crowd, I saw Ethan's expression change, not in pain, not in shame, just understanding, maybe even pride. I smiled faintly and continued. "So if anyone here is standing where I once stood, doubting, breaking, believing you need to be chosen to matter, remember this. Your story isn't over because someone stopped believing in it. Sometimes the rejection is the redirection you needed." The room erupted in applause. But for a second, all I heard was the quiet echo of my own heartbeat. After the ceremony, as people came to congratulate me, I noticed Ethan waiting by the exit. He didn't approach until the crowd thinned. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm. "I wanted to tell you." He hesitated. "You were right. About everything. I used to measure people by what they had. And then I lost everything that mattered." I nodded. "Sometimes that's the only way people learn." He looked down, hands trembling slightly. You deserved better. Always did. This time, I didn't need to answer. My silence said everything. When he finally walked away, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sorrow. Just peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop rewriting a chapter that's already ended. Outside, the city was alive with noise and light. The air carried that faint scent of jasmine, maybe from a passerby, maybe just a coincidence, and it made me smile. I stood there for a while, breathing in the night, thinking of everything I had lost and gained: love, pain, ambition, solitude. And then I whispered to myself softly, "You did it." Not as a celebration, as acknowledgement. Because sometimes surviving is enough of a victory. When I got home, I found my father asleep in his chair, the TV flickering quietly. I covered him with a blanket, then walked to my room. On my desk, beneath stacks of papers and framed certificates, was a small note I'd written years ago, right after Ethan left me. One day, he'll remember what he threw away. But more importantly, one day, you'll remember what you found. I smiled and slipped it into a drawer. I didn't need reminders anymore, because the woman I had become wasn't built from spite. She was built from persistence, love, and the quiet decision to keep going even when no one believed she could. And as I turned off the light and the room faded into soft darkness, I realized something simple but profound: forgiveness doesn't make the past prettier. It just stops it from defining your future. There's a point in every story where revenge loses its sharpness. You look around and realize the only person still bleeding from old wounds is you. That's when you finally learn what power really means: not making others feel small, but standing tall without needing to prove you're bigger. When Ethan rejected me for being too poor, I used to lie awake imagining all the ways I'd show him I was worthy. Success was a finish line I ran toward breathlessly, thinking that if I reached it, I'd somehow erase the humiliation. But when I finally got there, I understood something I never expected: that real power is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just exists. Life has a strange rhythm. The people who once pitied you will one day ask for your help. The doors that were slammed in your face will eventually open, not because they've changed, but because you have. But the real victory isn't in making them regret it. It's in walking through those doors with grace, not vengeance. I used to want Ethan to see me: the clothes, the car, the company, the respect. I wanted him to realize what he'd thrown away. But when he stood before me years later, broken by his own choices, I didn't feel triumph. I felt empathy. Because the truth was, I didn't need his regret to validate my growth. That's the quiet kind of freedom people rarely talk about: the moment you no longer crave apology or recognition. You stop performing strength and start living it. We grow up believing that love or success will fix the pieces that pain broke. But the real healing comes from acceptance, from saying, yes, it hurt. Yes, they left, but I'm still here. Every time someone tells you you're not enough, too poor, too plain, too fragile, too loud, remember this: their words are just the limits of their own imagination. They see the version of you that fits their comfort, not the one capable of outgrowing it. Don't shrink yourself to stay within their vision. I used to hide my roots: the small house, my father's worn hands, the sacrifices that smelled like burnt tea and late nights. I thought success meant burying that part of myself. But now I understand that was my foundation. Every time life tried to humiliate me, those roots held me steady. So, if you're standing in the ashes of someone else's doubt, wondering if you'll ever rise from it, let me tell you, you will. But not by becoming who they wanted. You'll rise by becoming who you were meant to be before they made you question it. It won't be easy. You'll cry. You'll doubt. And some nights you'll want to give up. You'll see others racing ahead, laughing at your pace. But remember, every masterpiece takes time. You're not late, you're building something that can be rushed. And one day, when you least expect it, life will circle back. You'll walk into a room where you once felt invisible, and people will whisper your name with respect. The same ones who overlooked you will speak carefully now, because your story has weight. But you won't gloat. You'll just smile because you'll know you didn't win by chance. You earned it. That's the moment you'll understand what I did. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final proof that you're no longer living for someone else's validation. It's standing in the same place where you once broke and realizing you don't hurt anymore. Ethan's rejection wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of my awakening. If he hadn't walked away, I might never have learned to stand alone. Sometimes the worst thing someone does to you becomes the best thing that ever happened, not because of what they did, but because of who you became afterward. So here's what I've learned, and what I want anyone reading or listening to remember. Don't chase people who can't see your worth. Don't beg for space in lives too small to hold your dreams. Build your own. Create the table. Set the rules. Invite only those who bring peace, not validation, because one day, when your name carries the weight of everything you built from scratch, you'll look back at the people who doubted you and you'll thank them, not for their cruelty, but for giving you the fire to prove, not to them, but to yourself, that you were always more than they could handle. And when that day comes, don't look for applause. Just breathe. Because peace, the kind that no one can take away, is the loudest victory of all.